folks. I'm Tom Vasel. Welcome to 40 Years of Great Games, where we look at games for the tabletop that are the 10 best from each year. Of course, in my opinion. And today we're going back to the year 2002. 2002 was an extremely pivotal year, one of the best years of gaming, actually, of games that were released. One of the most influential, powerful games was released during this time frame, but there was a lot of really cool, neat games, and we started seeing even more changes to the gaming landscape to bring it to where modern gaming is today. So let's get started with number 10. Number 10 is a small card game from DV Jochi, which is Bang. Bang is a game that just it almost has spawned so many similarity games to it. Now, yes, there's been games before where there's been hidden roles. We've already talked about Werewolf in the past. But Bang brought this kind of to an action game where you weren't sure who everybody else was. And you were trying to convince people, and then there was more than just two teams. It was the Outlaws versus the Sheriff and Deputies, but there was also a renegade in there who was just causing havoc. And this sort of thing brought this kind of werewolf-esque thing to a game, and there was also card play as you were just attacking each other with a Western theme. And Bang had many expansions and many copies, and later on a dice version of it has come out in recent years. But this game was just extremely popular at this point in time. Number 9 is Mexica. Remember I talked about the Mask trilogy a few years ago, and when I was talking about these, with Tikal being the most popular of the Mask trilogy? Well, Mexica was the last game made in this trilogy, and is one of the better ones. I really like Mexica, where you're building just different areas, cutting them in with canals, and then trying to control the area where these canals have cut into. So it's like an area control game where you kind of carve out the space as time goes by. It was just recently reprinted by Yellow with some amazing components. I highly recommend you give this one a try. Number 8 is a game that did not get much buzz in 2002. It was reprinted last year by Rio Grande Games, and I believe that was the first time it came out in English too, and that's Mogul. Now what Mogul did, and it basically had a bit of an auction style to it where you were trying to buy different shares of train companies. But the way the auction worked was you were paying coins to stay in, or you would take all the coins and drop out. This was a really cool, simple concept. This shows up in other games as time goes by. But Mogul took it and made it just very simple and easy to fun to play. The revised version that just came out added one small rule which makes the game even better. Check it out, Mogul. Number 7 is Fist of Dragonstones. Now, I mentioned Fist of Dragonstones for a couple reasons. One, it was the logical following up of Citadels, basically where players were going to be bidding coins and trying to win different characters that would eventually let them get these gems, which they would eventually use to buy Dragonstones, which they would use to win the game. But what this game did, I think, more than anything else, is it put a very small fledgling company on the map. And that company was called Days of Wonder. Have you heard of them? You probably have. They have made amazing games. When you hear a Days of Wonder game, you think it's amazing and it's going to have amazing components. Nowadays, almost every company has games with amazing components. And I think Fist of Dragonstones is one of the reasons for that, because they said, yeah, this is a small game with bidding, but we're going to make this game look fabulous. And they did. And that has really ricocheted through the industry. It was like, wow, here's a company making games that look great and people are buying them, of course. Number 6 is Pueblo. Pueblo is a three-dimensional style game where you have these 3D plastic blocks that players would place on this thing, and there's this chieftain walking around, and you're trying to hide your color as you're building this, so he doesn't see it as he walks by, either sometimes from above or sometimes just from his point of view. It's abstract for sure, but a very good one, Pueblo. Number 5 is the other punch from Days of Wonder, the other game that they came out with this year, Pirates Cove. This was the big box games. You see many of them behind me, these square games. Pirates Cove was basically a reprint of an older game from Paul Randall where you went around and searched on treasures, on islands for treasures, and you fought other pirates. You had your own pirate board, and you would upgrade different parts. And again, absolutely stunning components. Just from the treasure chests were round cubes, but they weren't cubes. They were like rectangular to make them look more like chests. Just small attention to details like that really was like, wow, Days of Wonder knows what they're doing, and this game was a fun family-style game, Pirates Cove. Number 4 was one of the first, not the first, but one of the first more popular games from Richard Breese. Richard Breese had been making great games over time, and you'll see his games show up. He still makes about one every year from his company, but this one is Cathedral. Many of his games have key in the front. Keytown, Cathedral, Keydom, Keyflower, and the Cathedral was about building a cathedral. And players were using octagonal tiles, which kind of was like, whoa, octagons, that's kind of neat. And so it was almost like a more advanced version of Catan. A very solid game, was eventually reprinted by Z-Man Games, didn't really last that long, but if you can find it now, I certainly recommend it. Cathedral. We mentioned before Lord of the Rings, the cooperative game from Dr. Rainer Knizia. Well, he was going to not let that Lord of the Rings license go, so number 3 here is Lord of the Rings Confrontation, where you have 2 different groups of people going up against each other, the light side against the dark side, in a game that was essentially Stratego for gamers. You had these people, you moved them, you didn't know what number they were, but it was Stratego with powers, it was simple, it was fast. It's like, wow, this is the way Stratego should be. An excellent game. One that they made a deluxe version a few years later from Fantasy Flight that offered alternate characters, very good, but even the small original game was an amazing one, Lord of the Rings Confrontation. Number 2 is the big daddy of the year, the game that when it came out rocketed to number 1 at Board Game Geek and stayed there for many, many, many years, and I believe is still in the top 10, still considered by many people to be the classic Euro game, the perfect game. Many people find almost no problems with this game, and that's Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico by Andreas Seaforth, who was known already for the game Manhattan, but this one is the one that rocketed him to fame, and where players are like, this is the kind of game we want to play, as he took the ideas where you essentially take an action, you pick a roll in the middle of the table, and then everyone will do that roll, but the person who picks it gets a bonus. A simple concept, and then you're getting goods, building them, building buildings that give you special abilities, taking these goods and shipping them back for points or changing them into money, which will allow you to build more buildings. There are many great concepts. This game has really stood up over the course of time. I still remember when I first played it, I was like, I don't know much. This game seems okay. Why is it rated so highly? But the more I played it, the more I realized just how amazing Puerto Rico was. It is a fantastic game, and going to go down probably as a classic. And yet it's not my number 1. That's because my number 1 is a fantastic game I like even more, and that is Wallenstein. Wallenstein from Queen Games introduced the Cube Tower. Actually, didn't introduce the Cube Tower. The Cube Tower came out from a Crusade game from Queen the year before, but I hadn't seen that one. That one kind of just fell off the radar for many people. But it brought this Cube Tower to prominence, where when you fought battles in Wallenstein, you would take cubes of your color and cubes of the person you're fighting, you throw them in the top of the tower, and some of them would get caught on the way down. And the ones that came out determined who the winner were. Wow, what a neat concept. That's enough to make me want to play a game. But like I said, remember there was another game that used the same concept about the Crusades. It just didn't do very well. This one did well because this game had a very neat concept where you were fighting over this German area, and each turn you pick these cards that show the areas you control, and you say what action you might be taxing them. You might be harvesting in them. You might be using that to move to another spot. You might be building a building there. And players had to put their action cards in each of these provinces and try to build out and fight. There wasn't that many battles in this game. The battles are cool and neat, but there's not that many. You have to kind of also build a nice infrastructure and work around and try to keep yourself from getting crushed by your opponents. It's a little bit of a war game. It's a little bit of a Euro game. This is one of the first hybrid games that came out, and it just was solid. It's still being reprinted later on. They came out with a Japanese version, but this is still my favorite, the Wallenstein version. An amazing game, the best of 2002. All right, those are my top 10 games from 2002. What are yours? You disagree? Agree? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, until next time, I'm your host, Tom Vasel. You've been watching 40 Years of Great Games on the Dice Tower.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching the Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.